Does polling really matter, Mr. Pollster?
Hi, I'm McLean Bowers from Kingston High School, and I was wondering, how do you ensure that polls are aptly representative of all citizens in Washington?
Very good question, and that is key to survey research.
Hi, this is Alex, host of the Doomed Planet podcast. You're listening to episode 79, Flawed Pollster, Stuart Elway. Polling is not accurate. It's an inexact science. More often than not, a poll is actually a push poll. That's where the people calling you want to plant ideas in your head to advance their own or their clients' agendas. I think I know this because in 1990, my first job after arriving in Seattle was working for Pollster, Stuart Elway. He had a company called Altair Research, which is just a side company to his company Elway Research, a polling company working for just about everyone in the state of Washington and beyond. So I'm in this room on Dexter Avenue, this big call center. There's like 30 people in there. We're sitting at desks with our headsets on, reading from printouts of surveys. And of course, there was some manager type who was monitoring us, and a very primitive at this point, no caller ID or anything. We're calling, whoever answered their phone with a landline at the time. Cell phones didn't really exist for the most part. So we're calling mostly, elderly, rural white people in Washington State. I did take home some of these surveys and the employee manual and stuff, and it still pisses me off how deceptive it all was, and also that Stuart Elway is still a respected pollster and member of the community and the Seattle business establishment. From the employee manual, probing instructions, guidelines, always probe with complete sentences. You're probing, you're trying to draw information out from these people dumb enough to answer the phone. And a lot of these surveys are 10 or 20 minutes long. I mean, you don't tell that to the person when you call, but you're roping them into fucking wasting their time, trying to give their opinions for the benefit of some, establishment, entity, institution, or giant corporation. While there will be times when more than one probe will suffice, it is usually true that one probe will elicit more useful information. Only use neutral, unbiased probes when clarifying. You can't suggest answers to a respondent or guess what they mean by what they're saying. An example, you hate 7-Eleven? It must be because of their prices, huh? Don't ever let a respondent know how you personally feel about the product or issues you happen to be discussing. That could be a rule of journalism, but not really. If you're going to be honest, you have an agenda. Everyone does. Whoever you work for does. You might as well be upfront about that. After clarifying the respondent's initial responses, you'll want to probe for additional information. When probing, never probe in such a way that the respondent can just say no. For example, if you ask, "Is there anything else?" or "Is that all?" it implies that you don't want to hear any additional information. When probing for addition, probing, Stuart Elway, you are the king of probing. One lady I worked with at Stuart Elway's Altair Research, she told me one day that the supervisor said she sounded too black. And this was definitely, this is an entry level. I didn't know anyone in Seattle. Well, one guy, and, no connections. And so this is an entry level job, minimum wage. In the employee manual, though, creepy safety concerns. If any accidents occur while on the job, please contact your supervisor immediately. Many chemicals are used in the office. Please do not eat or drink any of the following. A. Lysol disinfectant. B. Windex window cleaner. C. Dishwashing soap. D. Toner for the copy machine. Do not put items such as pencils, paper clips, staples, etc. in your eyes, ears, nose, or mouth. So they're trying to be clever here, but it's just infantilizing. I was not treated with respect at this place. And of course, Stuart Elway was never to be found. He never showed up at the office. I've never met him. And I didn't contact him for this podcast because, giving him an answer to respond to this, blatant hit piece, that's not my style. I don't give a shit what the fucker says. This has been a public service announcement on behalf of the Board of Health, brought to you by Altair Research. Polling. It's not accurate. It's bullshit. Nate Silver, Obama predictor and famous pollster, runs a website, whatever, polling firm called 538. And according to him, 538 uses statistical analysis, hard numbers, to tell compelling stories about elections, politics, sports, economic, lifestyle, etc. Okay? Hard numbers. So 538 projected that in Washington State, Joe Kent, the Trump Republican chud, was going to beat Marie Gluesenkamp Perez. They said Joe Kent would win by more than 12 points. The Democrat, Marie Perez, won. There are levels of stupidity with polling. For example, Elon Musk, new owner of Twitter, puts out these Twitter polls. According to Slate magazine, please vote in Elon Musk's dumb Twitter polls. Nobody has any idea, probably least of all Elon Musk himself, just how many of these votes are from legitimate accounts, who really is voting in the polls, or what the poll-making process looks like. That's all polls. It's completely opaque. All this polling bullshit. It's really, it's all polls are push polls. It's propaganda. It's designed to plant a seed in your mind about an idea, an agenda that, some powerful force wants to put forth. And so Elon doing these, should Trump be reinstated? Yes, I think he should. He's a comedy genius. I want him back on Twitter. A great percentage of Twitter accounts are accounts with no followers, accounts that are just fakes or, anonymous accounts. That's how I kind of operate, semi-anonymously, and or bots.
We're here with H. Stuart Elway, one of America's most respected political pollsters.
Stuart Elway is a local boy. His dad was a politician in Washington State. And Stuart started his business in 1975 when he was young. The Elway poll, according to his website, has been providing independent, nonpartisan analysis of public opinion since 1992. Okay, officially since 92. The Elway poll specifically is a quarterly poll. In 2018, the Elway poll, or Stuart Elway, partnered with Cascade Public Media to form the Crosscut Elway poll. So in other words, Elway got absorbed by Cascade Public Media, parent organization for KCTS 9, Seattle's public television station, and also a news website, crosscut.com, started by David Brewster, famous for creating the boomer newspaper Seattle Weekly, which no longer exists. So this Cascade Public Media, it's a nonprofit, although they do take lots of corporate donations. They also have lots of pledge drives. And really, I pity the on-air personalities and everyone else that has to beg for money, given that their corporate sponsors could easily foot the bill. And one of those corporate sponsors of Cascade Public Media would be Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation. Funnily enough, Bill's primary investment vehicle is called Cascade Investment LLC. So yeah, it's a pretty mountain range, and anyone can call themselves Cascade. But amusing that KCTS9 Gates has long been a sponsor. I've told this story on a previous podcast, but I went in there once to visit at the office, and there was a giant big screen TV in the lobby, and it said gift from Bill and Melinda Gates. And this is when this sort of hulking monster was worth a fortune, $10,000 or whatever. And of course they had gone on to newer technology, and out of the generosity of their hearts, they had donated this behemoth to the TV station. Of course, it bothers many people, including myself, that these supposedly public media outlets are so intertwined with the corporate establishment. We go to KCTS9, to their website, corporate sponsorship. Your KCTS9 corporate sponsorship campaign is a valuable media buy. Our corporate support staff will work with your... Why should a public news organization have a corporate support staff? We'll work with your organization or your agency to build an effective campaign that leverages your investment and expands the impact of your sponsorship. KCTS9 builds community by inspiring a smarter world. That's why over 2.2 million viewers. And be associated with quality programming. KCTS9 examines issues in a thoughtful and engaging way. Yes, mostly from a neo-lib, establishment point of view. Capitalism is not great, but that's what we have. There's no way to change it. Here's a new Ken Burns show. Reach a large and loyal audience. Our viewers support our corporate partners. PBS ranks #1 for public trust. No, nobody is stupid enough to believe the media now, regardless of whether it's geared to neo-lib, right-wing Democrats like PBS or far-right kooks. The link to PBS ranks #1 for public trust just goes to pbs.org. Survey says #1 for public trust. Let's head over to elwayresearch.com. The first thing I notice is that my web browser says this is not a secure connection. Your connection to this site is not private. Information you submit could be viewed by others, like passwords, messages, credit cards, etc. I also noticed that the site apparently was made in 1996. It's back when I was doing websites. Copyright 2020 by Elway Research Incorporated. Elway Research, insight, clarity, utility. It is often said that perception is reality. More to the point, your public's perceptions are your reality. What do your objectives look like through the eyes of those with whom you need to communicate? And, they do a ton of surveys. We'll get to the client list, just everyone. Some of them seem more innocuous than others. It's a survey for Northwest Food Processors Association, December 17th, 1990. Hello, this is Alex. with Elway Research, an independent opinion research firm in Seattle. Today/tonight, we are conducting a survey regarding public health issues. For this interview, I need to speak with the male-female head of this household. Would that be you? If yes, continue. If no, ask for that person. Number 1, the first questions are about public health issues. When you think about issues related to public health, what is the most important issue that concerns you? Number 2, our diet and the food we eat is one aspect of public. So you finally get someone dumb enough to answer the phone, and you're going to ask them all these boring questions for 15 or 20 minutes. Another thing is they never, at least when I worked there, they didn't identify who was commissioning the survey, who was paying them to do the survey. So I don't say, hello, this is Alex with Elway Research on behalf of Northwest Food Processors Association. No. But, and what are these associations, these business associations anyway? Well, I can tell you, I bet that they don't like taxes and that they don't like regulation, and that's why they exist as an institution. So that's charming, because that basically goes against the general public good and the commons and people trying to, get rich people to pay their fair share of taxes. Survey says that surveys are bullplop.
I do survey research primarily, public opinion research. So what's a survey? A survey is a systematic way to get information from a small number of people in order to estimate what the entire population is thinking. So I interview a few hundred people and then from that extrapolate what public opinion is looking like in the state on various issues.
Altair/Elway Research, Weyerhaeuser Ad Track, Oregon Wave 3. Hello, this is Alex with Altair Research, an independent opinion research firm in Seattle. Tonight, we are conducting a short survey on issues facing Oregon State. For this study, I need to speak with name on label. Would that be you? This is not a sales call. Altair Research does not sell any type of consumer products or services. The study is being conducted for research purposes only, and everything you say will be kept strictly confidential. Your telephone number has been randomly selected from all possible telephone numbers in the state of Oregon for participation in this study. I would sincerely appreciate having the opportunity to include your opinions. The great thing is you start off in a place of dishonesty, because instead of saying, hi, I'm with Altair Research and I'm doing a survey on behalf of Weyerhaeuser, they don't get immediately mentioned. First, thinking about the future of the economy in your area in the next 2 or 3 years, do you think the economy will get better, stay about the same, or get worse? Again, this is 1990. Economy is shit, and the forestry industry has experienced some sort of temporary decline and a lot of layoffs. This is also the era of the spotted owl. This is an endangered bird living in the forests of Washington and Oregon that is threatened by the practices of these giant corporations, and the practices being that they basically clear cut everything and destroy environments. But the locals, I'll tell you this, the locals and former loggers, unemployed loggers, they would have been Trump people. They hate the spotted owl, and I heard more than one joke about spotted owl burgers. So great to lead off with that question about the economy, get people a little nervous. Let's talk about forest in Oregon State. Here are 2 points of view. Please tell me which you agree with more, and rotate. That means every time I ask this, I ask the second one first or the first one. So here are 2 points of view out of nowhere on this survey. 1, too much logging is being done, so there won't be enough timber to meet future demands. 2, enough replanting is being done to ensure that future demands for timber are met. So those are your two choices. There are other options, but that's what we want you to think about. Do you agree with this statement strongly or somewhat? Number 4, I'd like to read you a statement. Now imagine you're on the phone with me and I'm going through this and you're like, God damn it, this is going to take 15 minutes. Please tell me if you agree or disagree with this statement. Trees grown by forest products companies are a renewable resource, and as long as the companies replant them and take care of the environment, the growing and harvesting of trees for wood products should be encouraged in the Northwest. Do you agree or disagree, strongly or somewhat? So, wow, trees are a renewable resource. But as long as companies replant them and take care of the environment, the companies do not do that. It's the opposite of what they do. And why? So you're planting this fake knowledge in the head of, the person you're calling. And so it's a push-pull in a way. You're spreading these ideas and, so the end result is the poll. You're going to pretend that this poll where you called 200 or 400 people is representative of the whole population. The second scam is you're individually targeting people for this mini brainwash event of me calling you. To the best of your knowledge, are there any laws requiring timber landowners to replant their lands after timber harvest? If yes, continue. If no, skip to question 7. Okay, we'll continue. How quickly are timberland owners required to replant their lands after timber harvest? Don't want to look up if there was any sort of law regarding this in 1990, but timberland owners, as far as I know, are not required to do anything. Furthermore, even if you replanted over a clear cut, you have a sea of stumps and the biodiversity is gone and you're just going to plant a forest of all the same thing. What crap. Here are some actions that might be considered when it comes to regulation of the forest products industry. What the hell does the average person care about the regulation of the forest products industry other than they should pay their fair share of taxes and not destroy the environment? Neither of which they do. So then you have to go through this list of 6 items, and then they have 4 choices: very much needed, somewhat unneeded, not needed at all. A law requiring timberland owners to replant within an 18-month time frame. Regulation limiting the size of clear cuts. That's good. Let's just limit the clear cuts, couple square miles at a time. Total elimination of clear cuts in the state. A ban on all log exports, including those from privately owned lands. That's garbage. There was never discussion of that, and there never will be. It's absurd. A measure limiting the amount of timber private landowners can harvest from their lands. And regulation, do you think we need a ban on the harvest of all old-growth trees? In your opinion, should private timber companies have the right to sell the logs they grow on their own land to the highest bidder, even if that means sending the logs out of the country? That is a great libertarian question. I wonder what the corporation would want. Would they want to sell the right to sell their product that they grow on their own private land to the highest bidder? No, they just want to sell it to the lowest bidder because it's a charity.
Jillian, let's bring in former Clinton pollster and advisor Mark Penn, now chairman and CEO at Stagwell Inc. Mark, welcome.
Thank you.
Senator Warnock appears to be leading in the polls, but since the red wave never materialized, does polling really matter, Mr. Pollster?
I am reminded that on the way to work at Altair Research one Saturday, I was pulled over on Denny Way by 9 cop cars and arrested in a case of mistaken identity. They thought I was this kidnapper. I spent all day at the East Precinct and then at King County Jail. I was interrogated by the FBI, and foolishly, I just talked because I was innocent, obviously. I later won several $1,000s from the city. I'm hoping there's not a connection with how I fucked with Altair Research and getting arrested that day. The next few questions concern the Weyerhaeuser Company. Really? Well, so we're going to bring up the Weyerhaeuser Company. Not that this survey was paid for by them. We wouldn't want that, would we? Or we wouldn't admit that. How do you think Weyerhaeuser's forest practices stack up against other companies? Are they a great deal better, somewhat better, not as... Okay. All timber companies are fairly evil. They still haven't geared the industry over to hemp. Pulp and paper mills use an incredible amount of toxic chemicals to process their, well, you get the picture. Please rate the job Weyerhaeuser is doing at replanting their lands after timber harvest. The thing where they started leaving a strip of trees along highways so that drivers couldn't see clear cuts, that basically started happening in the late 80s, early 90s, because too many dirty, smelly hippies were complaining about driving past all these clear cuts, and out of sight, out of mind. So that's a leading question if I ever heard one. They don't do a good fucking job at replanting anything, even if they replant anything at all. Just your best guess, how quickly do you think Weyerhaeuser replants its lands after harvest? Immediately, I'm sure. Just your best guess, what percentage of Weyerhaeuser's forest land do you think they harvest every year? If don't know, probe. Would you say it is 20%, 10%, 5%, 2%? Do you think it varies greatly from year to year? Again, just your best guess. Guess which of the following categories best describes what portion of the logs used by Weyerhaeuser come from their own land versus the portion that come from other sources, including public lands. Almost all the logs come from their own lands. Okay, so the truth here is that much of Weyerhaeuser's business revolves around harvesting from public lands in association with the Forest Service. Thinking back over the past 3 months, have you seen or heard any advertisements by Weyerhaeuser? No, because advertising is useless. Do you think a big deal is made about the Clio Awards where ad agencies, vote for the best commercials? Do you think that's a huge thing? No, nobody cares. Everyone knows it's shit. Do you think there's a whole bunch of podcasts examining advertising and marketing with a critical eye? Yeah, I guess so. But the big picture is, why waste your time? We know it's garbage. Question 17 of many. I'm going to read you a list of 5 separate actions Weyerhaeuser might take over the next year to improve its environmental performance. Those 5 actions include: make a major new commitment to recycling. No, they did not do that. Devote 10% of its land to older trees for wildlife habitat. No, they didn't do that. Significantly reduce the size of clear cuts. Maybe over the past 30 years they've done that. Provide open access to its lands for recreation. I don't know. Leave buffer strips along highways near which clear cutting has taken place. Yes, that is the answer. Would you vote for or against a law that prohibited clear cutting in privately owned forests? There is no such law. It doesn't make sense. That concludes our survey. Thank you very much for sharing your time and opinions with me. Your answers will be very helpful. On January 17th, 1991, the Gulf War began. George H.W. Bush began an attack on Iraq and the liberation of Kuwait. This was seen by my friends and I as a war for oil. And previously, on December 13th, 1990, I called people regarding the Seattle Times Washington poll, Iraq Redux poll. Altair Research Incorporated, job number 4450. I did call my girlfriend at the time about 10 times to give her this survey, or pretend to give her the survey. It shows you how accurate these surveys are. I was actually trying to stack the deck with anti-war results. Of course, it's all meaningless, so that was just a way to pass the time. Hello, my name is Alex from Elway Research, a local public opinion research firm. We are conducting a survey for the Seattle Times about the situation in the Persian Gulf. You are one of 400 people selected at random who is being interviewed. For this interview, I need to speak with a male, female who lives in this household and who is 18 years of age or older. Would that be you? Are you currently a resident of Washington State? And second question, in general, do you approve or disapprove of President Bush's decision to send American troops and combat aircraft to Saudi Arabia? That was a big deal. A lot of Muslims are not happy that the American empire suddenly has all these war machines parked in the Holy Land. I'd say if I was a Muslim, I would strongly disapprove. What are some of your reasons? How likely do you think it is that Iraq will withdraw from Kuwait because of the economic sanctions being imposed on Iraq? How likely do you think it is that American troops will be involved in actual combat in the Persian Gulf region in the near future? Very likely, somewhat likely. Again, Bush threatened Saddam Hussein, gave him a deadline, right? January 16th or 17th, whenever, get out of Kuwait or the bombs start raining down. We all know what happened. I'm going to list some of the reasons that have been given for U.S. military involvement in the Persian Gulf. Like, who was the giver of the reasons? You know, the State Department, the Bush administration, the Pentagon. Please tell me if you favor or oppose U.S. military action to achieve each objective. It's funny, I worked a temp job after this job at an engineering firm, and ironically they were building a pulp and paper mill. And all these engineers were like right-wing, former military Republicans, and there was this one guy who was against the Gulf War, and they were like calling him a communist and everything. It's just so elderly white rural residents of Washington State, or people who are engineers and work for Boeing and stuff, that's a right-wing group. So do you favor or oppose U.S. military action to destroy Iraq's nuclear weapons? God, that's... So remember the second Gulf War, the lies about Saddam having nukes. Now he's developing nukes of some kind, but on a very small scale, and that question is a lie in itself. Iraq did not have nuclear weapons. To defend Saudi Arabia, yeah, oh, I love them. To restore the government of Kuwait, oh yeah, another great country. And finally, to protect the United States oil supply. Very good. Oh, to depose Saddam Hussein, of course. As you may know, the United Nations has passed a resolution calling for Iraq to withdraw by January 15th. If Iraq does not withdraw, what do you think the United States should do? Attack or keep trying other means to resolve the conflict? If there is a military conflict between the U.S. and Iraq, how long do you think it will last? Days, weeks, months? Funny, in this case, it did only last months. Now, if you had asked that about GW's Iraq war, yeah, years. Many, many years. I have just a couple of last questions for our analysis. How old are you? If you had to register by party in order to vote, would it be Democrat, Republican, or Independent? This survey is sponsored by the Seattle Times. A reporter may wish to call people back to talk about these issues. Would it be all right if a reporter called you? Okay, so may I ask a name so the reporter knows who to ask for? That concludes our survey. Thank you very much for sharing your time and opinions with me, Alex Mayer, working a minimum wage job at a really shitty survey company in a phone grindhouse. Your answers will be very helpful. Page 1 of the Seattle Times lead story, Thursday, December 20th, 1990. Most feel Gulf War is inevitable. 55% say the U.S. should keep trying other means. Others say the U.S. has no choice but to attack if Iraq doesn't withdraw from Kuwait. In the history of this country over the last century, not doing something like that when a country has exhibited raw aggression has cost us dearly, said Ray Jones, 52, a computer consultant from Redmond whose nephew is stationed in the Gulf. Stopping this at this point is very important. However, it has to be stopped. That's great. I hope his nephew survived that war and didn't have to kill a bunch of human beings. Added Bill Hammer, 72, a retired log truck driver from Bellingham. We're namby-pamby if we back down. Our government has to stand behind what they said. Where would we stand if we brought our boys home? We'd stand whipped. So there's graphs and stuff. And again, source, Elway Research. Most expect war in Gulf. 43% strongly approve Bush's decision to send American troops to Saudi Arabia. How likely do you think it is that American troops will be involved in actual combat? Very likely, 41%. Like we're wishing for it. If there's a military conflict, how long do you think it will last? 42% said months, so fairly accurate. It was a few months. So again, this is based on a purely unscientific phone calls to 400 people. The Seattle Times turns that into a front page story, cheerleading for war. And there's a whole bunch of bullshit to fill out the article that we don't need to go into here, other than to say, fuck you, Stuart Elway.
Hi, I'm McLean Bowers from Kingston High School, and I was wondering, how do you ensure that polls are aptly representative of all citizens in Washington?
Very good question. And that is key to survey research, is that you want to have, you're going to do a sample of a few hundred people and try to estimate how, in this state, 4 million voters are thinking. So that sampling is key to the whole process. It's the foundation of the whole thing. So first of all, you need to decide what your sample, what's the population that you are sampling. That is it all registered voters? Is it just those who are most likely to vote? Is it all adults? I've done surveys of high school students. So who's the population that you're looking for? Then you do a random sample of that population. That is, everybody who's in that population has an equal chance of being selected to be included in the survey. And that is really the foundation, the sampling.
I've had a lot of shitty jobs, and I always tell myself, I'll get through this because it's temporary. And unfortunately, so many people out there can't say that. They're stuck in an Amazon warehouse or at Walmart. And it's not temporary for them. It might be the only thing. I was fired from Altair Research probably because I started putting weird letters in their comment box, and they figured out it was me. December 18th, 1990. Again, this is typed on a typewriter, so there's weird typography with like exclamation points going up and down and stuff. Altair Research comments box, 1515 Dexter Avenue, Seattle. Dear Altair Research comments box, I don't mean to be rude, but I was wondering something that is of great most importance to me as pertaining to my job at Altair. I am sending this anonymously, not to be rude, but to be embarrassed. Why don't you allow seats and hookup monitors for each phone for people's friends who visit when they work? There are no chairs around for this purpose neither. My friend Sparky comes to work with me every day. I would like the privilege of giving him access to my phone line and an extra chair while I am working. He just has to stand around and stand around. Lucky because he is invisible and can do whatever he wants, but he can't sit with me while I work. I find this to be an outrage of the most outrageous magnitude. Sparky and I go everywhere together, and I want a phone line for him or I quit. Anonymous, please respond immediately or I quit. December 19th, 1990, Altair Research comments box. I don't mean to be rude, but I was wondering why not only have you given me a private phone for my friend Sparky, but you didn't even put up my last letter on the message board. I want to live in this great country and be free. If you violate my constitutional rights by not letting my friend Sparky have equal access as a close personal friend who causes little distraction or harm because he is invisible to my phone line, I think he'd really laugh out loud if he could hear me talking on the phone with an angry respondent. Sometimes when I'm home from work, Sparky will pop open a Coors Tallboy and tell me straight out that I shouldn't be telling people about him over the phone because it will throw off the surveys and such. I just laugh. My friend Dale had a research company in West Virginia, and I swear that if you don't give Sparky a chair and a phone hookup soon, I will take up and move down to Clarksburg and work with him. And by soon, I mean by December of 1992 and no later. And I don't want to make you think that I'm crazy, all caps, because I love Sparky and I love you too. Still anonymous due to illness. Please respond quickly or I will threaten to resign. December 20th, or earlier, but I hope not, 1990. Altair Research. Dear workers of Altair Research, care of the comments box. I regret to inform you that I will be forced to resign within 10 days if Altair Research does not install a private phone line for my invisible friend, Sparky. If you hired me in the first place, why didn't you think about Sparky? He needs me. I am outraged and disgusted by the outrage of Altair Research's lack of respect for my invisible friend. And I don't mean to be rude, but I think that if you don't back down at the last second and allow Sparky to have not only phone privileges, but free coffee and a free right to have a chair to sit next to me with, I will resign. I know I can always find another job, but 7 years of shucking oysters made me unstable, and 7 more years could rive me into the madhouse. Sincerely yours, Anonymous. I'm coming to you with a dumbass pole. Good loving, I got a truckload. And when you get it, you gotta get something. So don't worry, 'cause I'm coming. I'm a pole man. I'm a pole man. I'm a poll man. Stuart Elway's my name. I'm a poll man. Got what I got the hard way. Doing surveys each and every day. So honey, don't you fret. I got your polls, you ain't seen nothing yet. I'm a poll man. Oh, God. Respected pollster Stuart Elway, you are a piece of shit for making me call people with this bogus Seattle Times push poll that really was like a call for war, a call for the Gulf War, get it in people's minds. Saddam has nuclear weapons. I literally had to ask that question. How do you feel about that? Even though it was a lie. And we're going to get in now to Stuart's client list from his website. His client list is everyone. And the weird thing is, if you're a pollster and not just an advertising agency or a PR firm, there's this veneer of respectability, right? Just in the same way where KCTS9 was saying, well, we're the number one trusted station, or our content is better somehow. Well, pollster is, how many times, do we say they're impartial, right? Both sides. Elway Research has conducted hundreds of custom design surveys, key person interviews, focus groups. Oh, that's another one, unscientific kind of waste of time that ad agencies do. Electronic town hall meetings and workshops for government agencies at all levels, from the U.S. Navy to local water districts. Again, he's worked for everyone in the establishment. So if you work for the establishment, the corporate elite or government elite, then, you are the establishment, bro. And not only that, but, he started his career in 1975. What has happened between 1975 and our present day when this guy is still operating? We've seen unions destroyed. We've seen the rise of this sick neoliberal capitalism that kind of does not take human life or the future of our environment into account, because that interferes with the profits. That is Stuart Elway. Clients, government agencies, major corporations from American Airlines to Microsoft. Yeah, no one in Seattle can get away from the taint of Microsoft or Amazon at this point, too. Media outlets, from the Aberdeen Daily World to Al Jazeera. Nonprofits, from Fair Start to, okay, don't get me started. Yes, now I have started on Fair Start. This is a nonprofit that trains people to work in kitchens, and they go getting people out of prison, people on parole, people desperate enough to want to work in a kitchen for minimum wage. And it's, okay, maybe there's some good to this, but this is also, job training and whatnot. This is the prison to kitchen pipeline, folks. Of course, Angela Dunleavy-Stoll, the CEO of Fair Start, it's a tax-exempt nonprofit. She made $305,000 in 2020. Total executive compensation for Fair Start, $1 million out of the $25 million they raised. And of course, she is married to Ethan Stowell of Ethan Stowell Restaurants. And you can damn well sure he got a PPP loan. These small business tyrants can be bad, but the restaurant chain of restaurants, restaurant group, these are usually always some bad people in Seattle. From the Seattle Times, with more COVID-19 aid approved, some Seattle businesses call for rule changes. Seattle chef Ethan Stowell applied for and received the money in the first round of PPP funding. When asked how he plans to spend the money, Stowell told King 5, "We don't know. This program was put in place very fast. Many of these rules were made before quarantine was put in place. And that's the problem, especially for non-essential businesses and restaurants. Because people have a God-given right to run a non-essential business or a restaurant. They should be able to do that and be subsidized by the government. Stowell says that for the loan to be forgiven, the PPP rules require borrowers to spend 75% of the money on salaries. Oh no, paying employees. First of all, none of that loan stuff was ever followed up on. None of it was enforced. Every single one of these companies spent the money how they wanted to spend the money. Only 7 of Stowell's 17 restaurants are open. This motherfucker is like, we're Tom Douglas times 3. And just like everything in our system, a restaurant group, this is just a labor exploitation scheme. He has 17 restaurants because then he has that many more employees. And obviously his employees are selling him their labor and he's profiting from that. And fuck the food. He's doing a limited takeout business, a fraction of his 365 employees. Stowell wants to see the rules changed to allow him to spend the money on other business expenses. Elway Research has done polls for Allstate Insurance, Association of Washington Business. Again, we know what these business associations are, fighting regulation and fighting taxes. Bastyr University, that's a weird new age bogus college of homeopathy at the top of north end of Lake Washington in Seattle. Battle Mountain Gold Company, of course, spun off from Pennzoil in 1985. Yeah, I had to look it up. Battle Mountain Gold Company has operations in Chile, Bolivia, Papua New Guinea, and Australia. I imagine that they are as careful with their environmental impact as Weyerhaeuser. Bellevue Chamber of Commerce, that's our boring sister city to the east of Seattle. The Boeing Company, you don't say. Bonneville Power Administration. Citizens for Improved Services and Controlled Tax. Some kind of libertarian, catfishing weirdness. Citizens for Regional Justice Centers. We got to get those prisons built, so let's do a poll and see how popular those prisons are, but the poll will be rigged. City of Des Moines, City of Seattle, City of Kirkland, every city in the state. Downtown Seattle Association, the Ford Foundation, and from local old money wealth, Frank Russell Company. And let's not forget KCTS9 and the Gates Foundation. King County Executive, King County Metro, all government agencies, they need propaganda too. Cairo, KUOW, Public Radio, Pyramid Communications, that's John Hoyt. He was a friend of Bill Clinton, and he built a PR business based on that. And when I was hanging out at their office a bit, big open space, a lot of interesting people, things happening. They were working on the Pearl Jam free concert thing. And John founded Pyramid based on his belief that a company could be successful working only for good causes. He specializes in communications work. It's called PR, and high-level strategic and fundraising campaigns and initiatives. That's called advertising and PR. His recent clients include Puyallup Tribe, Arikara Nations, Cascade Public Media. Who's that? And Pearl Jam's Vitology Foundation. The Vitology Foundation is a 501c3 organization founded by Pearl Jam to translate the ethos of their music into tangible, positive impacts. To maximize its effect, Vitology works as both an advocate and a donor. Do you think this question is A, bullshit, B, offensive, C, fine, it's Pearl Jam, they suck, or D, great altruistic thing, bettering our world and genius? Pearl Jam donates to 3 categories: homelessness, no link; indigenous causes. Pearl Jam has worked quietly in the background with tribal groups for decades, very quietly. We don't want anyone to know, especially on this website. Okay, there is a link for environment. Carbon mitigation. Since 2003, Pearl Jam has calculated the metric tons of carbon dioxide output from the world tours, calculations based on band and crew flights, hotel stays, bus mileage. Based on this calculation, the band allocates a portion of tour profits to invest in environmental projects. Better than nothing? Yes. Greenwashing and just complete hokum? Yes. So you can't go one episode without hating on Pearl Jam, especially if this podcast keeps ending up being a Seattle history of crime and musicians gone astray, which is what it is. No, the Pearl Jam rabbit hole. Stop me. From their website, November 8th. Today is election day. This year, our freedoms are on the ballot. Click here to find voting locations near you. If you want to know who controls Seattle and beyond, the rich and powerful people, of course, and the institutions that they own and prop up. And Stuart Elway, okay, the client list. We just got to wrap this up. Seattle Yacht Club, Seattle Public Schools, not had experience with that, believe me, not a great institution. Seattle Mariners, Seattle Chamber of Commerce, and, of course, Safe Streets Tacoma. Increasing public safety. On their board is a police chief, and they're concerned with crime. It's like a Elway survey, though, their website. No actual concrete anything, just vague language about safety and security. Damn.
There's a lot of talk, particularly in a meeting like this, about being able to work across the aisle and so on. And there are people who want to do that. There are, I guess, structural and partisan political barriers to overcome. Compromise isn't you agree with me, and then that's a compromise. Compromise is we each have to give up something in order to get something. And that seems to be a hard thing to do, but that's what it's going to take.
And now a word from our sponsor.
I don't just play someone brainy on TV. I'm an actual neuroscientist, and I love the science behind Nariva Plus. Unlike ordinary memory supplements, Nariva Plus fuels 6 key indicators of brain performance. More brain performance? Yes, please. Nariva, think bigger.
I would really like Mayim Bialik, except for this commercial for which she was paid tens of millions of dollars. It's a bullshit, unregulated supplement, and there's a disclaimer in this TV ad that says these statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Polls are crap, screamed the headline. Alternate headline, November 2nd in the Washington Post. The hidden, unsolvable problem with polls and the people who love them. By David Byler. He's a data analyst and political columnist focusing on elections, polling, demographics, and statistics. He joined the Post in 2019. Pollsters have problems. Almost 95% of Americans don't want to talk to them. Okay, then he talks some hokum about elections are harder to predict because of partisanship, which somehow means that every election or most of them are very close, too close to call? In fairness to pollsters, it's amazing that surveys still get within 4 points of the election result when, in italics, almost 95% of Americans refuse to pick up the phone. From the Yale School of Management, November 17th. Don't expect pollsters to break their losing streak. Polls predicted a red wave, but Democrats held the Senate and fought to a near draw in the House. Yale School of Management writes that after a series of polling misses, it's time to acknowledge the fundamental flaws in pollsters' approach. Number one being that 95% of people don't pick up their phones. Many media commentators regard the election forecasts put out by the domestic political polling industry as the product of highly sophisticated data analysis, providing breathless horse race coverage based on who is up and who is down in the most recent poll, when in reality their practices often veer more towards unsupported assumptions and sophistry. The sheer number of pollsters, which has exploded over the last 20 years, creates voter fatigue, tedium, and less willingness to respond for privacy and social desirability reasons. Telephone response rates have fallen below 9%, which is not considered close to a valid measurement in any social science fields. Online surveying can be more problematic. There's no national list of email addresses from which people could be sampled. We're going to wrap up this special Stuart Elway extravaganza by talking about a recent Crosscut Elway poll. This is from Crosscut. How does Seattle feel about crime? It's complicated. It's a push poll trying to get people scared about crime. Pollsters surveyed 400 Seattle voters via landline, cell phone, and text that directed people to an online survey. Respondents were distributed evenly through the city council districts, homeowner, gender, bullshit. That is all a lie. Here with us to analyze this cross-cut poll about crime and policing is an expert on the history of American policing. He's a writer, a podcaster with the Mechanical Freak podcast, Brian Platt.
The story you are about to see is true.
Brian from Mechanical Freak here. I'm here to peel back my human skin to reveal my scaly lizard interior, complete with political science degree. The question here is, what's the deal with polling, and why does polling on criminal justice issues specifically suck ass? Let's begin with just a pre-midterms prediction roundup. So in June, the Washington Post had an article titled "Crime is a Growing Theme Ahead of Midterm Elections," where they used polling results from a Washington Post and ABC News poll to warn Democrats that crime is going to be the number one issue on voters' minds. In October, Politico had an article, "Midterm Voters Key In on Crime," which cited a Politico and Morning Consult poll to again tell Democrats that, look, all voters care about is crime. Better get tough on crime. Stop coddling those criminals. Later in October, about 2 weeks before the election, U.S. News & World Report had an article, "How Crime Will Shape the 2022 Midterm Elections," predicting a red wave on the back of a crime panic, as crime in America reached all new highs. They cited a wide variety of polls to show how Democrats are really in trouble because they haven't cornered this crime issue. Now, a day before the midterm, the New York Times jumped in the game, always late to the party, I guess, with an article, "Fear of Crime Looms Large for Voters, to Republicans' Advantage." Again, warning Democrats that they've been too soft on criminals. They need to stop pointing at that statue of a woman getting mugged and saying, I like it, I love it, I want some more of it, all right? So those were the predictions prior to the midterms, and then whoops-a-doodle, turns out they got it all wrong. Not only did Democrats outperform expectations in the midterms, a miracle considering their pretty much total lack of action over the previous 2 years, despite controlling both the House and the Senate, as well as the presidency, despite the fact that they failed to do the one thing that in the last 40 years is the only thing the Democrats have promised, which is that they would protect Roe v. Wade, completely failing to do that. They somehow still were able to outperform expectations. And most interestingly, the candidates who went hardest on tough on crime messages did the worst. So Val Demings in Florida was crushed in her Senate race. Tim Ryan was bodied by J.D. Vance, absolute fucking loser and charlatan in Ohio. In Los Angeles, Rick Caruso lost his mayoral bid after he ran the most expensive campaign in the city's history that was laser focused on crime. And the real cherry on top, the New York State Democratic Party just fucking got wiped, given the fact that it's a goddamn blue state. Effectively single-handedly losing the House for the Democrats and handing it to the Republican Party after the New York State Democrats decided to go hard on the tough on crime issue to make Eric Adams sort of the focal point of their campaign. Incredible stuff. Now, interestingly, exit polling, where they just asked voters as they left, hey, why did you vote the way you voted? It seemed to indicate that all the previous polling was bullshit, because in the exit polls, nobody gave a shit about crime. Across the board, it was the third concern when asked to list what their biggest concerns were coming in. And by third, I mean a distant third. It was the third biggest concern for Democrats, who were much more concerned about Roe v. Wade and about the economy. It was also a distant third for Republicans, who were far more concerned about immigration and inflation. So what went wrong here? Why did all the polls get it wrong? And in short, what is wrong with polling? Well, the short answer is that polling in general is bullshit, and polling about crime and policing is especially bullshit. Now, to give just a quick explanation to that, for those who maybe want a little bit more, if not, you can go ahead and just stop the tape right here, right? But if you want a little bit more, there's several problems with polls, particularly polls dealing with issues of crime. So the first problem is just inherent to polling itself. Polling was a product of the rise of advertising and marketing. It essentially exists to quantify the unquantifiable. So it came about really in the 1920s, and it was a way for marketers to sell to their customers a little bit of secret knowledge, forbidden knowledge. What is the public thinking? And the problem being that you're asking them questions, particularly in political polling, about things that are a little more complicated than can just be numerically plotted on a chart. But it's really easy to look at and analyze things that are numerically plotted on a chart. So they just smashed down all the complexity of the question and boiled it down to polling. Now, the other issue with the fact of it being a product of marketing is that polling is for the customer. That's the thing you have to remember. If you're ever asked, questions on the phone by, Pew or Gallup or Elway, keep in mind, they don't really give a shit about you. They're selling something to somebody, and you are not the customer. So polling exists to create a specific set of answers for the customer that the customer then can use to move a product, etc. It means that polling is not a passive act. You're not simply sticking your finger up in the air and seeing which way the wind is blowing. It's actually actively trying to shape the public imagination. Now, the next problem with polling is that polling is largely, particularly large-scale polling, is largely only capable of reflecting the status quo back. The reason for this is a little problem called ideological hegemony and how it plays out in polls. Now, ideological hegemony is one of those things that is a $10 word. It maybe sounds a little scary, but the important thing to know is that no society can function without it. Essentially, at the base of your society, in the case of capitalism, you have the economy, right? The capitalist relationship that forms the economy. That backbone of the economy then overlays a superstructure that allows that economy to function on a large scale. Now, in that superstructure is simple structural elements like stores and banks and things like that. The basic, nodes that allow the exchange relationship to take place. Also in that superstructure is things like the military, which goes out and does imperialism for capitalism, right? Opens up new markets abroad, as they would probably prefer to say it. You have things like the police that protect the haves from the have-nots, right? That protect the wealth of capital from the poverty of the working class, right? You also have an ideological superstructure that overlays that. And the ideological superstructure exists to, A, inform people about how the society works, to tell them that that is good, and that that is natural, and most importantly, it's the only way that society can work, all right? So this is what we talk about when we talk about ideological hegemony. And the thing is, for a society to function, ideological hegemony has to exist, in which case all polling does is just tell you what you already know when you just do a sociological examination of the society itself. Now, specific to polling on criminal justice issues, a major problem is the fact that crime, in quotes, is a term without definition that is largely a cipher for other things. Now, to give an example what I mean by this, take the issue of street crime versus white-collar crime. Most of the time when people talk about crime, what they're referring to is street crime, meaning muggings, holdups, right, burglaries, things like that. Yet if you were to compare that to white-collar crimes like employer wage theft or tax evasion or various financial crimes, insider trading, etc., right? All that street crime pales in comparison, both in just dollar values. It's essentially nothing as far as what, is stolen. At the same time, its impact on society also pales in comparison. Yet, it's what you think of when you think about crime, the term crime, right? Similarly, when you think about violent crime, you think about assaults, the knockout game, murder, etc., right? What you don't think about is the decades and decades of corporate pollution of the environment that has caused skyrocketing rates of cancer across the country that probably kills more people per year than the murder rate does. Another thing you don't think about is stuff like, the construction industry being, lax on safety because things like OSHA and stuff like that have been, largely defunded, causing more on-the-job accidents, leading to an increase of deaths on the job. Again, that's done in the pursuit of profit, so it's not considered a crime. But what is the difference between that and, say, manslaughter or homicide? The difference is your ideological framework for understanding it. The reason why we hear crime, we think street crime, is because of the ideology that we're given from birth, right? We are not able to see the crimes of capitalism. It is literally, we are blinded to it. It is outside of our view, all right? So that's part of the problem. The other thing is that crime is a cipher for things like racism and sexism and, class bigotry. So a lot of times when people talk about crime, what they really mean is visible poverty. Or when they talk about a neighborhood being bad, what they really mean is black people live there, right? These are judgments that are divorced from actual crime rates and are really statements about, America's systems of segregation. And again, because our ideological hegemony teaches us to think that those are natural and good, when we see things that seem out of place from that system of segregation, we call it crime. So the final problem here that's worth talking about is people's perception of crime is informed almost entirely by propaganda. To give an example of this, for 30 years, Gallup has been asking people, do they think crime is worse or getting better? And 28 out of those 30 years, from 1990 to today, they thought that crime was getting worse. What's interesting about that is starting in 1991, crime began its long decline in every town, city, county, and state in America. It has been on a steep decline nonstop for 30 years. Even more interesting, that didn't just happen in America, but happened in all OECD countries. Another topic for another day. But the issue is, what polling shows is that people's perception of crime is exactly the opposite of reality. And the question is, how could that be? And the answer is propaganda. From birth, you are treated to a media landscape that tells you that crime is both dramatically higher than it actually is, and that the only answer to that is the police. So during that 30-year period where crime was declining, one of the things that happened is news coverage of crime increased dramatically. So news coverage of crime rose inverse to the actual crime rate. Part of the reason why people think crime is going up is that they just see it more on TV. TV shows, like I said, if you look at network television any day of the week, you're almost certainly watching a police drama. It's almost all they show on TV now. All of that, again, increases the feeling of a ever-persistent and growing crime problem. At the same time, it reinforces the idea that the only solution to that problem is the police. Now, this propaganda also extends into things like schools. Police were put into schools in the late 1960s, contrary to popular belief. It had nothing to do with school shootings or anything like that. They were actually put into schools to propagandize students. There was a fear that the police reaction to the civil rights movement, the assassination of civil rights leaders by cops, the brutalizing of people in the streets, things like that, that reaction to it was causing people to lose faith in the system and lose faith in the police. And so the SRO, or School Resource Officer program, was created in Los Angeles to put police officers into schools to essentially teach the students about the value of law and order and how to respect authority. Interestingly, they focused on middle schools first, not high schools, because they thought the high school students were already lost to the drug dealers and the communists, right? And they focused on middle schools because they thought they were easier to propagandize. The point being is that police were put into schools to propagandize the students, not to protect them, which is why they were not able to do anything in Uvalde, why they didn't stop the shooting in, Littleton, Colorado, right? While, all these things, right? And all that propaganda has had a collective impact on the public mind. So why have all the propaganda? The answer is that neoliberalism specifically leaves you with very few alternatives. Neoliberal reform can't fix the healthcare system. It can't provide you with healthcare because that would impede on the healthcare industry's ability to receive profits and to make profit arrow go up. They can't do anything about gun violence or the accessibility of guns because the weapons industry needs to turn a profit and that would affect them. They can't do anything about climate change because the oil industry, the natural gas industry, all have large constituencies in the United States, and they would like to continue to receive massive profits. So in so many things that affect your daily life, nothing can be done to remedy your problem, right? So your student loan debt can't be remedied because the banks rely on debt and the idea that debt has to be paid back in order to maintain their balance sheets, right? So many things essentially can't be ameliorated by the state because it would impede the process of making profits. But the one thing the state can offer is the police. Over the last 50 years, almost every social institution of the state has completely withered away or died. Schools have been defunded, mismanaged, etc., purposefully so. One of the more insidious things is that what meager school funding there is has been diverted directly to police departments. When a school adopts an SRO program, the school pays the police department to have the officer there, effectively taking money out of the school and putting it into the police, sort of a shadow budget transfer. But in so many other ways, the social arms of the state have been completely defunded. Public housing has disappeared. The answer has been more policing of the homeless. As libraries have gone under, the police have been given new fleets of vehicles and tanks, right? And so neoliberalism has essentially offered policing as the only option for the myriad problems that people face in a society that's growing ever more unequal and facing a lot of pretty serious challenges. Now, for the human side of that, for a lot of people in America, the police are the only arm of the state they ever interact with, and it's the only arm of the state they interact with that isn't actively being choked to death, right? So it's the only arm of the state that isn't being actively defunded, actively destaffed, all those kind of things, right? It's the only thing that gets more money every year. And because of that, people see that. And again, this is part of the effect of propaganda. This is, how ideological hegemony is created. They see this happening, and the only way they can interpret that is the police must be the solution to all of our problems, right? How does this apply to polling? Well, this affects how people are going to answer questions on polls. If you ask them, are the police good or bad? Well, if the police are the only option they're given for the amelioration of their problems, they're going to say they're good, whether they think, whether they've had bad experiences with the police or not. It's the only option on the table. Now, polling, this is part of the insidious purpose of polling, in that polling exists to lend airs of objectivity and legitimacy to fundamentally political goals and interests. So if your goal is to defund the social arms of the state and things like that, well, you go ahead and you start doing that. That's a political choice you've made. But you can lend that political choice an air of sort of objectivity by then polling people after you've, eviscerated, say, public schools, polling people and having people say, yeah, I'm mad about my school. It doesn't run as well as it should. All my students don't have like personal textbooks that they can use, all that kind of stuff. They'll say that and they'll be mad at the school. And then you point at it and you say, yeah, see, the school system doesn't work. Public schools don't work. I mean, we got to defund them further. Right. And the thing is that poll, it didn't exist to actually figure out what people's opinions were. Nobody actually gave a shit about what people thought about public schools. The reason that poll existed was to give a air of objectivity and legitimacy to a project that was already undergoing, which was defunding the school system now and ending public school altogether. Now, this works the same way with policing. If the answer that you want for social questions is policing, what you do is you achieve that by defunding everything else and increasing funding for the police. Then, a little bit down the road, you ask people about it. And of course, their response is going to reflect the reality they live in, which is the police are the only thing that get funded. And then you point to that poll and you say, see, this is what they want, this thing that I'm conveniently already doing, so therefore I should just keep doing it. Again, the point here is that polling is not a passive act. It is a tool of marketing. It's just marketing. Now, let's look at the crosscut poll just to kind of go through a little bit of this, right? So In the Crosscut poll, if you actually open the thing up and take a look, they asked people what they thought the causes of crime were. And in doing so, they reveal a few of the things that we're talking about here. In their list of causes of crime, they give 10 options of what could potentially be causing crime in the city of Seattle, and then ask people to think whether they thought those were major, minor, or not at all factors in crime. Now, the interesting thing is the question itself basically implies that crime is going up and then asks you to give a reason why you think crime is going up. The problem being, of course, the crime isn't going up. So one potential problem here. But what I want to focus on is the first three answers as far as, what people thought were major causes of crime. The first one, 85% of respondents said lack of mental health and addiction services was a major cause of crime in the city. And the thing is, that's not true. But what it does reflect, again, is the ideological commitment to seeing crime as the product of individual failings as opposed to systemic or structural issues. So if I say, a lack of mental health and addiction services is a major cause, a major factor in the crime rate, what I'm essentially saying is crime is created because individuals are crazy or on drugs. Now, the thing is, you could give the crazy people whatever, pharmaceutical drugs you want to give them, and you can take away the good drugs from the addicts, and you're still going to have crime. Because crime's actually created structurally. It's not created through individual failings. The reason why crime exists under capitalism is that capitalism systematically cuts people out of the formal economy, this is what we call unemployment, and forces them into the informal economy, what we call crime, all right? Now, this is where street-level crime comes from. Now, talking about other forms of interpersonal violence, murder, assault, etc., almost all of that is done between people who know each other, and pretty much all studies show if you ameliorate major stresses in life, the biggest one being, of course, money and financial issues, those instances of interpersonal violence go down. So again, we have the structural issue, which is the distribution of wealth and resources under capitalism causing violent crime. Yet when asked what factors, create crime or whatever, we're left with just individual explanations. People just individually have mental health issues. They individually are addicts, right? It's personal failings across the board. Now, this isn't to shit on the people who said that we should have more mental health and addiction services, because we absolutely should. This is people basically saying the obvious, which is we need more social services. But it's a framing issue, right? This is both how propaganda is created, how ideology is created, and how it's maintained, right? So this constant sort of catechism of, look, there's no structural problems, only personal failings. Now, the next two things that pop up on the list, right, is the next two most popular choices as far as major factors in crime are homelessness and economic conditions. And this is a perfect expression of the American brain. Homelessness is a product of economic conditions. These are essentially the same thing. But they're split out because in the United States, we are hardwired to believe that homelessness is not a product of the structure of our economic system, which again creates structural long-term unemployment and also chooses to ration housing based on price, right? These are all things we don't have to do but choose to do, right? That is the cause of homelessness. But in this case, homelessness is divorced from the economic conditions, right? In this case, homelessness is presented as a individual failing of the homeless themselves, probably because of their addictions and mental health issues, right? It never occurs to people that, by the way, that maybe one of the reasons why you see addiction issues among the homeless is that being homeless fucking sucks. That maybe it's the homelessness that causes the addiction as opposed to the addiction that causes the homelessness. Unfortunately, that would take actually talking to homeless people to understand, and nobody's interested in doing that because, of course, they are the sort of lepers of modern capitalism. But again, just hitting on the point of this is ideological hegemony at work. Now, looking at some other interesting data that showed up in the poll, there was a question of essentially what makes you feel positive about the Bruce Harrell administration. And again, the two most popular answers both refer to homelessness, which is his focus on homelessness and his focus on sweeps and clearing camps. Again, we get to this issue of what do people mean when they talk about crime. And in the United States, technically, being homeless is not a crime. Now, I understand that technically doesn't mean shit, and you can be arrested for anything. The only thing that actually matters is power and will. But the thing is that when we talk about crime, again, what people really mean is things like visible poverty. And what they really mean by that is disorder. Now, this gets to a more complicated conversation about the liberal obsession with disorder. And by liberal, I don't mean like Ted Kennedy. I mean the system we live under, which is liberalism. Whether you're Republican or Democrat, you are a liberal in the end, all right? I mean it in the actual political science definition of the term, all right? And liberalism, its rise comes in the United States, comes in the early 20th century in the progressive era. And essentially the function of liberalism was they looked at the 19th century, they looked at the chaos and disorder that was caused by capitalism, right? Caused by the business cycle, as they like to call it, or as they called it at the time, the Long Depression, the booms and busts of capitalism, the violence caused by inequality and things like that. Liberalism looked at that and it said, the problem here is not capitalism. The problem here is society is not being managed properly by proper professionals who would be able to smooth over capitalism's business cycle and capitalism's disorder and chaos. The problem with that is liberalism did not succeed because capitalism is inherently combustible. All right, it is constantly causing problems, whether those problems are inequality, which leads to crime, leads to people being angry at the state, being angry at businesses, etc., being angry with one another, or whether it's issues like, again, the business cycle, which liberalism was never able to tame, issues of recessions, depressions, etc. Liberalism was never able to actually tame those things, so when they happen, people get mad because capitalism actively makes their life worse. And liberals have to offer, the state, right, the media, etc., have to offer some sort of counter explanation for why people's lives suck. And those explanations are inevitably going to be focused on individual failure. So, again, the reason why you're homeless isn't because capitalism creates structural long-term poverty. The reason why you're homeless is because you made bad individual choices. You chose to smoke weed, so that's why you're homeless, or whatever, right? You chose to drink, and that's why you're homeless, right? It tries to take structural problems and deflect them down to the individual. And crime is one of the key ways that they do that. The focus on crime, the obsession on crime, the obsession specifically on crimes that are individual and street level, right? They both keep the focus on the right class, which are the working class, right? And they keep the focus on the individual. The reason why they don't want to talk about things like wage theft, tax evasion, stuff like that, securities fraud, things like that, is it's a little harder to blame those on individuals. They have the stink of structural corruption all over them. They also focus on the wrong class of people. So, again, right here, the people who are encouraged by the Harrell administration, it's because of his focus on homelessness and on sweeps, what they perceive as crime, right? But what they actually mean by the cipher of crime is disorder, visible poverty, which they choose to believe is the product of an individual failing. Now, miraculously, all over the country, in every city, town, county, individuals are failing at, higher and higher rates, all spontaneously, I'm sure. Definitely has nothing to do with the structure of late stage capitalism in the dying empire. But again, this is ideology at work. Now, not to just keep shitting all over this poll, something that's interesting in it is it does ask for people to give, some potential solutions for crime. Like, what things do you think we should do to, help make the city safer, etc. And this gets an interesting thing because hiring more police officers is 6th on the list. So it's 6 down. And a lot of polling doesn't do this. They don't offer any alternatives to policing. So, of course, people choose policing when given no alternative. This one actually does give you some alternatives. They're not policing based. And just like in every other poll that does this, even though it's rare, people choose those options, right? So given an option that's not policing, people choose the non-policing option. So in this case, people are asking for more addiction and mental health programs and services. Again, it's sort of focusing on individualizing the reason for crime, but at the same time, look, these are also services we need. We need to rebuild the social service infrastructure. Now, unfortunately, the second most popular thing is training for police and de-escalation, which is just a hand waving away of the fundamental problems with policing. But that's another topic for another day. But they do have some other things that are potentially non-police related, like programs to address the root causes of crimes. I mean, totally fucking meaningless, but it's at least people saying like maybe there's a just using the hammer that is the police to solve stuff. Adding non-police staff to respond to certain situations. This is something that at least has like a little more clarity as far as people have offered or put up actual programs and things like that are probably people are responding to here. Again, showing that when non-police alternatives are offered to people, they do find them attractive and are interested in them, which is why it's very important, of course, for politicians not to offer them. The final issue on this poll that's just kind of interesting and worth talking about is the issue of the demographics of the poll itself. 5% of the respondents of the poll self-identified as African American or Black. And the reason why this is important is this is just a poll of 400 people, which means we're talking about 20 people, which is not exactly a representative sample and is like more like half a classroom than a sample. This is the one where, I'm going to give Elway polls a bit of a pass because what this is actually a response to is the changing shape or the way that neoliberalism has terraformed the city of Seattle over time. Now, that's not to say sometimes we indulge in a fantasy in the city that this used to be some multicultural, paradise or whatever. It never was. The city was always extremely hostile to non-white residents. It never had a Black population on par with other major cities in the United States. It was always an extremely white city. That being said, the Black population still used to be a lot larger. In the 80s, it was about 10% of the city. Now it makes up 7% of the city. And if you were to actually dig into those numbers, you'd realize that 7% is largely new as well. Like, it's not that 3% of the Black population left or whatever, right? It's that there's actually been a loss of original residents who have then been replaced by a smaller number of new Black residents, if that makes sense, right? Now, the reason why that is important is that when you talk about issues of crime and when you do a poll where you're focusing on issues of crime, crime is a heavily racially coded concept in America. Ever since the Republicans endorsed the Southern Strategy and then the Democrats endorsed it with Bill Clinton in the 90s, crime has largely been a code word for things like integration, having Black people move next door to you, etc. It's one of those things that whenever you hear somebody tell you that, oh, that's a bad neighborhood, you know exactly what they mean. which is they're not referring to crime rates, they're referring to the complexion of the people in the neighborhood, right? And that makes it a little bit of a problem when you're trying to poll on opinions on crime if you don't include the population that crime is specifically a cipher for discrimination against, right? Now, again, part of the reason why, they're not able to poll these people is they have been thrown out of the city, right? Get the structural reforming of the city, the way that capitalism has worked at a structural level to change the city, to churn it in order to make profits for real estate and finance and for speculators, has changed the demographic makeup of the city. Now, another bit in the sort of, another methodological issue is that 29% of the respondents have a household income of over $150,000. Again, this is hardly representative of certainly the country as a whole. This is not how normal people live their lives. Most people are not living with a household income over $150,000. But in the city of Seattle, again, that has been terraformed, that has been changed fundamentally by market forces, right? This is increasingly the case. So when I say that the black population hasn't just declined in the city, it's actually, as a percentage of the city, it's actually different people. It's true of just regular residents in the city too. The white population has largely been replaced as well. Now, where's everybody gone? The answer is the suburbs. If you look at the declining black population in Seattle, what you see is over that same period, a skyrocketing black population in places like Federal Way, SeaTac, Burien, etc. Now, again, this gets to a sort of problem of polling, which is that it can't capture important things like the role of gentrification in affecting people's views on crime and how people interpret even what crime is. It can't catch it because that's not something you could just simply quantify with a, 10-word question with 5 multiple guesses to choose from underneath it. These are things that require actual study and thought and stuff like that. And polling is not capable of that. And more importantly, it's not interested in that. This gets to the sort of question of, should you care about polls? And as I mentioned above, the function of polls is to legitimize already existing political programs. And if that's the function of it, who gives a shit about polling? Now, to bring that just down to earth a little bit, if you were to look at polling during the civil rights movement in the 1960s, every single year of the 1960s, what you're going to find is the majority of Americans thought the civil rights movement was going too far and that black people had enough already. Now, if you have any understanding of what life was like in the 1960s in the United States, you understand that's obvious and total bullshit. But the thing is, because polls really just capture the hegemonic ideology of the time, and that ideology is fundamentally about maintaining the status quo, of course people's answer was, I don't think we shouldn't have any dramatic change in this country. Just keep everything as it is. If you were able to do polls in, antebellum America, what you would find is that both North and South, the majority of people at probably any given time would have said, slavery's fine, leave it alone. And the issue is for people on the left is, who gives a shit if that's the popular opinion, right? Of course it's the popular opinion because that's the opinion of the ruling class, so that's the opinion that gets pumped into people's brain by every method, imaginable, right? But the point of left activism or whatever, is not to essentially maintain the status quo. The point is to change it, in which case that means you're having to change people's minds, in which case who gives a shit what the popular opinion is? The popular opinion in policing is immaterial to what the function of the police are. So the question is never, do people like the police? The question is, what is the function of the police, and is that worth maintaining and keeping around? And if the function of police is to maintain capitalism, I say, fuck them, get rid of it. All right, well, I hope that made some sense. Remember, polling's marketing. That's the important thing to take from this. Polling exists to justify already existing political positions of the customer who ordered the poll. It is not there to give you a deep revelation. It's not there to show you any sort of hidden truths. It is simply marketing.
Wow, Brian, thank you so much. Now we have two parts to this episode. The first part, the rantings of a madman, and the second part, a reasoned analysis from an expert, brilliant take on polling. I like to crib ideas from the Mechanical Freak podcast. One idea that wasn't in my head that is now, that comes from them, is that small business owners are just as big of assholes as corporate business owners. They are small business tyrants. I don't know why that didn't occur to me. I've worked for so many weird small businesses or husband and wife teams, restaurants owned by psychopaths. Anyway, our longest and best episode yet. I'm back on track here, folks. I have a new laser printer so now I don't have to read off a screen. I can print out my scripts. This podcast is going to improve 100%. We will see you next time. Goodbye.
Podcast shout out.
Podcast shout out. Mechanical Freak, of course. These guys are not stenographers for the rich and powerful like most media personalities, and they're funny. Like Brian, it always seems when you listen to him like he's smiling and laughing, even though he's talking about things that are unspeakably grim. Mechanical Freak, check it out.
Find out more at doomedplanet.com.
5, 6, 7, 8. Goodbye. This is the end of the song.
Compromise isn't you agree with me, and then that's a compromise. A compromise is we each have to give up something in order to get something.